Welcome to Living Life, the show that allows you to pursue things that make you happy, curious, and keep you open-minded. This is Living Life on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. Welcome to Sweets, Treats, and Eats on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. I'm Howie Morgasen. On this show, we're going to talk about soup and the comfort of soup. There are lots of different types of soups out there. I chose 4 today that I think are fairly simple to put together, and I'll take you through those. But soup's that kind of thing that when it's just a really cold day outside, that you come in and you sit down with a warm bowl of soup and it just warms you up all over. So I hope you will have a chance to try that. Also for today, I did a lot of pre-preparation work for the soups. And you will find that it might make sense for you to do it as well. So you're always ready to go. And when you want to get soup on the table, you'll have the things in the refrigerator and you'll put them together quickly and you can have the soup on the table in 15-20 minutes, which is really good. So to check out information about the show, you can check us on social media at Living Life ETB. So make sure you check us out. And now why don't we get started with Loaded Cauliflower Soup. All right, so let's get started with our loaded cauliflower soup. So we're going to put a small light under our pot. We have some olive oil in there, and we're going to start with some chopped onions. So we'll put those in, and we're going to mix them around. And so we want to actually soften them up. So it's going to take about 5 minutes to do it. As you can see, the onions have become translucent. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add the garlic. And we're going to add some bacon because this is a loaded cauliflower soup, you know. So we're going to mix these in here. Give them a little bit of time to get acquainted with the onions. Go and smell that garlic. Woo. Good. All right, and now what we're going to do is we're going to pour in the wine. Okay, and we're going to give it some time for that wine to sort of cook off. All right, so that looks pretty good. So now we're going to put the star of the show in, and that is the roasted cauliflower, which we have here. So we will mix that in. That looks great. And now we are going to put in the chicken broth. All right. So we got that, and we're going to give that a mix. And now this has to cook for about 20 minutes, so the cauliflower gets really soft, and then we'll get to the next step. As we can see, the cauliflower has softened nicely. When I put it up to simmer for 20 minutes, I added a bay leaf, which I'm going to grab here. And I also had some sprigs of thyme, which I put in, so I'm going to pull those out as well. All right, just a couple more. Okay, got that. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to smooth up the cauliflower soup. And I have this immersion blender. And an immersion blender is a really cool device. It's not that expensive, but it allows you to do is put it right into what you're working with, and then just like moving it around, you can actually smooth out what you're working on. It has 2 speeds, so you can get it the way you want. So you can see that I've now made the broccoli soup nice and smooth. All right, so I'll take that out, put it to the side, and then to finish it off, we're going to add some salt and pepper. A little bit of pepper. All right, then we're gonna stir that in. And then the last finishing touch is we put a little heavy cream into the soup to make it nice and smooth. And we mix that in. And now what you have is loaded cauliflower soup. And when you serve it, the idea is when you put it in the bowl, you put some cheddar cheese over the top and some sprinkled bacon, and you're all set to go.
Hey, I'm Tony Montori Jr. I know you've been following us and watching us on Living Life Home Design Concepts is my show. There's lots of shows and lots of interesting things going on here. I like to bring a new tip or tip of the month kind of thing to you, where I talk about design concepts, how to make it easier to hang pictures, how to enhance the energy in your home, or just decorating in general. So join me and look for a new episode of Tony Montori Jr. on Living Life Home Design Concepts, and I'll help you solve some of your home decorating situations.
Okay, let's make some Italian wedding soup. So before we get started, just a little bit about it. The name wedding comes from the Italian phrase minestra maritata, and that has to do with the marriage of ingredients that all come together that bring you this delicious soup. It really has nothing to do with going to weddings. That's what I thought. Anyway, so we have our oil here, and it's simmering, and we're going to add in our onions. And then we're also going to add in our carrots and celery that we've diced nicely. Okay, and then we're also going to add some chopped thyme. Okay, so now we're going to mix this up. And we're going to make it a little hotter. And now this is going to take probably about 5 minutes. What you want to do is get it so all the vegetables are translucent or look like they're getting transparent, and that'll take about 5 minutes to do. At Living Life ETV. I just thought I would mention that. That is the social media place where you can find sweets, treats, and eats, all kinds of recipes and things that happen and bloopers and stuff like that. So why don't you check us out? So you can see the vegetables have wilted and they're nice and soft. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add the chicken broth. And we have low sodium chicken broth. So we'll put that in here, and then we're going to mix it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to bring it to a boil. As you can see, the soup is boiling, and that's great. So we're just going to mix it a little bit. Okay, and then the next step is we're going to put in the macaroni, and we're doing a bite-sized macaroni because you want to be able to put in your mouth and on the spoon. So this is tubatini, which we have here. So we'll put that in. And then we have the meatballs. And as you can see, they're little meatballs, for little mouths. So we make up the meatballs, and I include the recipe for the meatballs. So we're going to put in, easily and carefully, we have about 1.25 pounds of meatballs in there. And we're going to mix the whole thing. And then this has got to cook for I'd say about 5 to 7 minutes. And then we will put in the last part of it, which is the spinach. And then we will have our Italian wedding soup. Okay, so closer to 7 minutes has gone by. Everything has come together nicely. And then the last piece that we put together is the spinach, which goes in. So I have the spinach here. We're going to dump it in. And then we're just going to mix it so it gets into the soup, and then that has to cook for another 5 to 7 minutes so the spinach gets incorporated and wilted and cooked in as part of the soup, and then you will be able to serve this very good looking Italian wedding soup.
You're watching Living Life Sweets, Treats, and Eats on the Empty the Bench podcast network. If you're looking for a new favorite podcast in the areas of sports, pop culture, or news and entertainment, you should check out some of the fresh voices and fresh perspectives on the Empty the Bench podcast network. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter at ETB Network. Again, that's both on Facebook and Twitter at ETB Network. The Empty the Bench podcast network. We're more than just sports.
So let's make some French onion soup. You know, French onion soup goes back a long way, even before the Middle Ages. As a matter of fact, the Greeks and the Romans enjoyed a soup made with cooked onions and broth. So, at some point, the French decided that onions should be caramelized to bring out their natural sweetness, and that's what we're going to do here in this French onion soup. So we start out with some butter because the French love butter. And I've talked before about butter because there's different types of butter that you can use for cooking. And if you're cooking, it makes sense to pay a little more for the better butter. The one that I use for most of my cooking is one called Kerrygold. And it's a really, really nice butter. It melts well and it has a great taste to it. So that's what I recommend. So the butter is melting, and now we're going to take the star of the show, which is the onions, and we're going to put the onions in, and you can see we have a lot of onions. So what's going to happen over time is that the onions are going to break down and caramelize. That's what I talked about before. The natural sweetness and sugars of the onion are going to break down as well. And this large pot of onions here is going to cook down to a very small pile of onions. And we'll show you what that looks like. So you can see that big stack of onions has now cooked down to a small stack of highly caramelized onions. So you can see the brown, which means the sugar has been developed and it's there. So what we need to do now is take the wine and put the wine in, and then what we're going to do is called deglazing the pan. And that simply means is all those good bits that get stuck on the bottom when the onions were cooking, you know, need to cook. So we're going to just sort of keep stirring it, and when it turns into like a jelly-like thing, you know, we'll be ready to go. And I just wanted to remind you that you can go to @ETB Network and you can find out about Sweets, Treats, and Eats and the other shows on the Empty the Bench podcast network. So make sure you check that out. So you can see that it's starting to form the jelly. So I'm just going to mix it a little bit more, and maybe I will turn up the heat a little bit more to get it going. So after we do this, we're going to add the broth and the bay leaf, you know, and then we're going to sort of let it simmer so everything sort of comes together. So I think we're ready to do that. So we're going to take the vegetable broth and carefully add it. Okay, we got that, and we have a little bit more that we need to add, which is here. Okay, we're just going to stir that a little to get everything going. And then I'm also going to add a couple of bay leaves to it. 1, 2, 3. And then I'm just going to let this simmer for about 20 minutes. And then it'll be ready to serve. And then we're going to put it together with a soup crock and the bread and the cheese to make a really awesome onion soup. So we made the French onion soup, and let's talk about how to serve it. So we have this beautiful French onion soup here that we worked on today. And now what I'm going to do is, these are croutons. And what I did was I took a baguette bread I bought from the supermarket, sliced it into very thin slices, put some olive oil, and I put some garlic and basil, salt and pepper, and then I just roasted them, and they turned into these really nice baguettes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put 2 of them in each of these to start with, like that. And then I'm going to take this beautiful French onion soup, and I'm going to ladle it into each one of these crocks. Now, These are soup crocks, which are special. And the reason why they're special is because you can put them directly in the oven, which is important for this French onion soup, because after we put in this soup into the crocks here, a little bit more over here, maybe a little more in this one. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to put a couple of more of these on the top here. Okay, I think this one here needs a little more soup. We'll take care of that. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to take some Gruyere cheese, which I have over here, and I'm going to sprinkle it over the top like this, and some for this one over here. And then after we get these with the cheese on them, we're going to put them in the oven for a couple of minutes so the cheese gets all melty, and then we'll see what it looks like.
Hi, I'm Jerry Barmash. Join me for Here Now the News. It's an entertaining one-on-one interview featuring newsmakers and much more, whether it's political or pandemic related, someone from the media or an author. You'll find it here. A fun chat. Hopefully you'll learn something too. Recent guests have included Petrie Hawkins-Byrd, the former Judge Judy bailiff, legendary game show host Bob Eubanks, and Matt Asner, son of famed actor Ed Asner. Subscribe and share. Don't miss Here Now the News as part of the Empty the Bench podcast network.
Okay, so now we're going to make the butternut squash soup. So again, we're starting out with some olive oil in our soup pot, and then we're going to add shallot to that. And shallot's like a baby onion. It's a little more sweeter. So we're going to put the shallot in here. It's going to take probably about 2 or 3 minutes for the shallot to become translucent and release some of the flavor. So we're just going to keep an eye on it. You can see that the shallot has turned translucent. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put in some garlic. Stir that around a little bit. Make sure it's well cooked. So I just wanted to mention again, if you want more information about the show, you can check us out on @LivingLifeETV, and you can find out all about sweets, treats, and eats and what we're doing. So why don't you check us out? So I can see that the garlic has cooked a little bit. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add the butternut squash. So there is some of it. We got the rest of it over here. Put that in. All right, that looks good. So what we did was we put the butternut squash on a cookie sheet and then put it in the oven, and we roasted it for about 15-20 minutes. So it gets that charred look that you can see here, adds a lot of flavor to it. So that's part of the pre-work we did to get ready for making the soup and to get the butternut squash as much flavor as we can out of it. So the next thing we want to do is we're going to put in the vegetable broth, and that's right over here. Okay, we got that in. Just mix that up a little bit. Okay, then we're going to add a couple of spices to it. So we're going to add some maple syrup, and that's going to sweeten it up a little bit. And then we're going to add some nutmeg, because nutmeg is really good with butternut squash. And then a couple of cracks of black pepper, like that. And then we're just going to give it a good mix. And then the magic happens when we put a cover on it and let it simmer, and it's got to simmer for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll finish it off. Okay, so as you can see, the butternut squash has softened up. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take the immersion blender that I showed you earlier, and we're going to go in and we're going to blend it up, make it smooth. It's doing a good job of, so we'll make sure that we get everything covered. All right, that's looking pretty good. Okay, so what we want to do next is we want to grab a little butter, and we'll put that in, and then we're going to continue to blend it some more. Get the butter all blended in. Just great. So that is the butternut squash soup, and now what we're going to do is show you what we've been working on, bring all the soups together, and let's take a look. We made some really terrific soups, and let's sort of go through what we did for you today. We started out with this great loaded cauliflower soup, and it's got bacon in it, and it's really smooth. When you serve it, you can see up front here that after you put it in the bowl, a little bacon on the top, a little cheddar cheese, it's just like a loaded baked potato, which is essentially why it's called loaded cauliflower soup. The next thing we did was the Italian wedding soup, and that's right over here. And that has macaroni, and it has meatballs, and it's got spinach in it. It's just an incredible soup that you're really going to want to try. After that, we did French onion soup, and you can see that over here. And after we made the French onion soup, we put it in the crocks, and these are oven-proof crocks. And we put in the bread, you can see there, we made those over there. A little bit of olive oil, a little bit of garlic, a little bit of basil, and put it in the oven. So we put those in, we ladled the soup in, and then we put the Gruyere cheese on top of it, and then we put that all in the oven for a little bit, and it makes it melty and gooey, and it's just delicious. And then the last soup that we did was butternut squash soup. And that's made up of butternut squash, and it's got a little maple syrup in there for a little sweetness, and then a little sweet cream to finish it off at the end. And that's a terrific soup. So in addition, most of these soups can be enjoyed as a meal. So you add a terrific bread, like you see over there, we have a sourdough rye bread that I picked up at the market. And you slice it up and you have it on the side, and it's really good. And then you also have the baguettes that we use to make the onion soup. You can use those as well to serve them. So I hope you'll try making some of these soups or adventures on soups of your own. There's plenty of recipes out on the internet to check out. Speaking of the internet, you can check us out in social network at Living Life ETB, and that's where you'll find out more about this show, or at ETB Network, where you want to find out more about the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. I hope you had as much fun as I did with you today making these soups, and I look forward to seeing you next time on Sweets, Treats, and Eats.